Shadow people, often described as dark, shadowy figures that resemble the human form, have intrigued and terrified individuals across cultures for centuries. Unlike ghosts, which are typically viewed as the spirits of deceased individuals, shadow people are often perceived as more sinister and elusive entities. Their appearances are frequently reported as fleeting, with many witnesses catching only a brief glimpse out of the corner of their eye. This elusive nature has led to a variety of interpretations and theories about their origins and purpose. From a spiritual perspective, some believe that shadow people are interdimensional beings, existing in a realm parallel to our own. These entities are thought to occasionally cross over into our dimension, often prompting feelings of dread or unease in those who encounter them. In certain spiritual circles, shadow people are associated with negative energy or malevolent intent, acting as harbingers of misfortune or chaos. Religious beliefs about shadow people vary significantly. In some traditions, they are seen as demonic presences, entities of darkness that seek to harm or influence humans. This view is prevalent in various Christian denominations, which may interpret shadow people as manifestations of evil forces. Conversely, other belief systems consider them to be neutral or even protective spirits, guardians watching over individuals or sacred spaces. The phenomenon of shadow people invites us to explore our deepest fears and the mysteries that lie beyond our understanding. Their presence in folklore and personal accounts highlights the human tendency to find meaning in the unknown, attributing supernatural origins to experiences that defy logical explanation. With that out of the way, here are 3 chilling and allegedly true stories about shadow people. After finishing my late shift, I felt that familiar pull toward Kate's place. Over the past few months, we'd developed an unbreakable bond, finding solace in each other's company during those long, quiet hours after midnight. As I pulled up to her house, the cold night air pricked at my skin, carrying an unsettling stillness. I pulled into Kate's driveway, and something was already off. Stepping out of the car, I saw her sitting on the back doorstep, hunched over, clutching a cigarette like it was her lifeline. Her face was pale, eyes wide and glassy with fear. "What's wrong?" I asked, feeling my chest tighten. "There's someone in my living room," she whispered, barely meeting my eyes as her hand shook, her cigarette burning down to the filter. "Who?" I asked, my mind racing to catch up. Kate was silent for a moment, clearly trying to compose herself. "A shadow. It's just walking around in there." I didn't want to go back inside, she exhaled shakily, and her words hung in the air like frost. Trying to ground myself in logic, I offered, "Let me go check it out." Kate just nodded, her gaze pleading with me, as though words could no longer bridge the depth of her fear. I stepped through the back door and into the silent house, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator, a low thrum that seemed to reverberate through the stillness. My every step felt louder, each creak of the floorboards sending my heart rate up a notch. As I neared the living room, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crept over me, a primal instinct warning me of something unseen. I paused, taking in the dim room cast in a faint glow from the streetlights outside. The curtains were drawn, but they were thin enough for the light to filter through, casting strange, shifting shadows against the walls. And then I saw a figure moving back and forth by the window, its dark outline just barely discernible against the curtain. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, reasoning it had to be a trick of the light, or maybe a branch swaying in the breeze. But then I realized that the night was dead calm, there wasn't a breath of wind outside. The shadow wasn't just moving, it was pacing, slowly, deliberately. I could feel its anxiety, a restless energy seeping through the room, as if it was waiting for someone. I froze, breath caught in my throat, as the figure paused in its pacing and turned. For a heartbeat, 2 faint yellow lights pierced the darkness, staring back at me from where eyes should have been. The lights flickered, dim and unsettling, but unmistakably fixed on me. I felt a strange paralysis grip me, my body betraying me as fear drilled into my core. Then, without warning, the room blazed to life. I spun around to see Kate standing in the doorway, her hand on the light switch. She had forced herself to follow me in, despite every instinct screaming to stay outside. "Do you see it?" she whispered, her voice trembling, the edge of desperation in her tone. I turned back to the window, where the shadow had been just seconds ago, but it was gone. No figure, no yellow eyes, only the empty room. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew I wasn't imagining it. "See, I told you." Kate's voice was low, almost reverent, as though daring to acknowledge the horror we had just witnessed. We stayed up together, talking in hushed tones as the hours bled into each other. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold a trace of that figure. Kate drifted in and out of sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I kept picturing those yellow orbs piercing through the darkness, staring straight into my soul, as if they had marked me, knowing I'd seen it. Finally, dawn crept through the windows, casting warm light across the room, washing away the lingering tension. It felt like an exorcism, like the light itself chased away the memory of that sinister figure. Due to a change in my shifts, I couldn't return to Kate's house for a few more days. During that time, Kate and I kept in contact via text. She was still on edge, but said the shadow hadn't come back. Here's hoping it never does. When Aidan moved into our old apartment, he quickly laid claim to the room at the end of the long, dark hallway. Moving into the apartment wasn't our first choice, but the rent was cheap, and we all had to make do with what we got. Aidan was new to the city, and despite his usual easygoing demeanour, he confided in us that he felt uncomfortable in his room. At first we wrote off his complaints, thinking it was just the creaks and groans of an old building settling at night. But as the days turned into weeks, his unease grew more palpable, and frankly it got a bit annoying. One night, a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness of our sleep. We all bolted upright, hearts pounding, and rushed to the living room, which adjoined the hallway leading to Aidan's bedroom. Aidan stood there, pale and trembling, eyes wide with terror as he recounted what had happened. He said that his door had suddenly swung open, and a shadowy figure had walked in, standing over him while he lay frozen in bed. We tried to console him, though some of us were skeptical. It seemed too fantastic, too far-fetched to be real. Nevertheless, Aidan's fear was genuine. Not long after that night, he moved out, citing a new living arrangement with his girlfriend. But we all knew the real reason he could no longer bear the nightly visits of that shadowy apparition. Weeks later, we threw a party at the apartment. The subject of Aidan's ghostly encounter came up, and in the spirit of bravado fueled by alcohol, a few of the guys decided to test their mettle by walking down the infamous hallway. One by one, they came back, laughing and saying they had seen nothing. Later that night, one of the guests who had crashed on the living room couch got up to use the spare toilet at the end of the hallway. As he was leaving, he saw a shadow blocking his path. It just stood there, silent and menacing, seemingly watching him. Terrified, he retreated into the bathroom and waited until the first light of dawn cast away the shadows. He recounted his experience the next day, but I, like with Aidan's claims, dismissed it. I chalked it up to sleep-deprived imagination, or maybe too much to drink. Months passed, and due to a reshuffle among the housemates, I ended up moving into the room at the end of the hall. I didn't think much of it at first, but one night, I woke up to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity before turning and moving through the closed door. I was shaken, but I convinced myself it was just a trick of the mind, a figment of my imagination playing tricks in the dark. But a couple of nights later, as I was getting ready for bed with the lights still on and the door ajar, I caught a glimpse of something moving out of the bathroom and moved down the hall. I looked again, but there was nothing there. Now I'm beginning to understand the fear and unease Aidan felt. Was the shadow in the hallway just a figment of our collective imagination? Or is it something real, something that haunts the darkness of our apartment, waiting for the night to return? I come from a big family, which was something I was very aware of around the age of 12. With 5 brothers and sisters, our house was always bustling with noise and activity. Sometimes it got too loud, and I just needed a quiet place to retreat away from my younger siblings. That's why I loved spending time in the garage. It was my little sanctuary where I could tinker with Dad's tools and learn how to fix things. Mostly I worked on my mountain bike, making sure it was in top shape for our weekend rides. Dad never let me use the power tools though. Too dangerous, he would say. Otherwise I was free to learn and tinker. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting on an old stool, flipping through one of Dad's car magazines. I dreamt of becoming a mechanic one day, just like Dad. As I was engrossed in an article about classic cars, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I quickly glanced up, but saw nothing. I shrugged and went back to the magazine, thinking I must have imagined it. But then, it happened again. This time I saw a shadow move on the other side of Dad's car. I leaned forward, peering through the car window, expecting to see one of my siblings trying to scare me. They loved to tease me whenever I was in the garage, but there was no one there. Just the shadow, sliding along the floor and disappearing by the workbench. A few nights later, I went out to the garage again. It was early evening, and the sun had just set. As I stepped inside, I noticed a shadowy figure standing in the corner by the workbench. I thought it was just a trick of the light. A shadow cast through the window from the neighbor's outdoor light on the other side of the garage. But as I walked further in, the shadow moved toward me. My heart pounded, and I bolted out of the garage, running straight to Dad. "There's something in the garage," I yelled. Dad looked at me with a mixture of concern and amusement. "All right, son, let's go check it out." He grabbed a flashlight, and we went back to the garage. Dad shone the light into every corner, checking around the car and under the workbench. There was nothing there, just the usual clutter and the faint smell of oil and metal. "See? Nothing to worry about," Dad said, ruffling my hair. "Probably just your imagination." But it didn't feel like my imagination. It felt real, and it scared me enough that I stopped going into the garage for a while. I missed my quiet space, but the fear of seeing that shadow again kept me away. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I glanced out the window and noticed the garage light was still on. I was about to go tell Dad when I saw something move inside the garage. A dark shape, shifting and flickering in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat, and I watched, frozen, as the shadow moved across the garage. I never told Dad about that night, but I never forgot it either. The garage, once my favorite place, now held a presence I couldn't explain. And every time I passed by, I couldn't help but glance inside, half expecting to see that shadow again, lurking in the corners, waiting for me to return.